Hi, Soaring Spirits. This is Dr. Sam Dreeben. For those of you who I haven't met already, I am chair of the psychology department at Schreiner University in Kerrville, Texas. I'm a clinical psychologist and a co-collaborator with Dr. Carrie West on research involving widowed people and resilience, including the publication of the Widowhood Resilience Scale, which we created via research data we collected from Soaring Spirits. So you all have a special place in my heart, and I'm always happy to get to be with you all when I have the opportunity. Today I'm going to talk briefly on the topic of stress, which is a closely related topic to resilience. And I wanted to maybe provide a few more subtle points about it than I think what commonly gets discussed. We know and have known for a long time that people who are widowed, particularly in the immediate aftermath of conjugal loss, experience a great deal of stress. In fact, famously, Holmes and Rahe listed conjugal loss as the number one stressor of all potential stressors in their life stress inventory. Now, when we looked at resilience and how people respond to stress, we saw that social support is extraordinarily important, and I'm guessing that you've heard a lot about social support recently because A, there's been real limitations on the kinds of social support we can get, and B, it seems even more important in the face of a global stressor, the COVID pandemic. And so today I want to talk a little bit about social support and stress, knowing that we're all going through stressors and that you in particular may be experiencing this stress in distinct ways, particularly if you're perhaps a caregiver for children independently or have other pressures in your life that may have added on to stress that was already present before the current circumstances we find ourselves in. And so today I want to look at this idea of when social support is a protective factor against stress and when maybe it's not. Particularly, let's take a look at that second point, because sometimes I think that social support gets discussed as if it's a universal good. But I'm guessing, even from your own lived experience, that you know in some instances what seems like social support can actually feel like it's one more thing that is adding to the sense that I'm not up to the challenge of whatever's facing me today. And so the question is, when does that happen? When is social support helpful? When is it not? Of course, the answer is that the social support is helpful when it's quality. It's not really a question of quantity, but a question of the type of social support you're getting. Now, I assume you know who your real friends are and the people who make you feel good, but sometimes we still get tricked into situations socially that may add to our individual burden. And this makes sense. We are social creatures through and through, and it's very difficult sometimes to understand the pressures that we exert upon one another in a social sense. So I'm going to highlight a few of those, in particular ones to be on the lookout for. And the first of those is what I might call reciprocity. By the way, I'm borrowing a lot of this from the research of Robert Cialdini. He's a social psychologist who wrote about the ways in which we influence one another. A lot of his work is focused on how to get people to do what you want them to do from the perspective of, say, marketing. But you can also read it as a cautionary tale of how to be protected against coercive social interactions. So the first of these he calls reciprocity. And it's this idea that we all generally carry around with us, that if someone's done something nice for us, we should do something nice in return. By and large, this is a really wonderful thing. And there's a reason that we all inherit this social norm, is that society is predicated to a large extent on the ways in which we use reciprocity with one another. Where this gets tricky is when individuals, rather than using this norm as something that dictates their own behaviors, that is, that they want to do something nice for someone because that person's done something nice for them in the past, Instead, they create situations where there becomes a tally of sort, a running list of who's done what for whom. If you find yourself in social situations where you feel increasingly that the person on the other end is keeping tally of where you two stand in terms of your social interactions, this is likely going to be a stressful relationship rather than one of support. It's going to add to the feeling of indebtedness that you might already have in other places in your life. So be on the lookout. It's not to say it's not the right thing to do things for people who've done things for you, but it shouldn't be an obligation. It should be a choice between friends, between people who are in relationship with one another. The second point I was going to bring up is something called authority. That's what Cialdini would call it. And authority comes in a lot of different varieties, but there were two things I wanted to point to in particular. The first of these is what I'd call criticism. We all criticize and judge. I'm not judging and being self-righteous about that. I realize the human element of that. But for certain people who criticize regularly, this can actually be a flexing of their authority in situations. And when a person establishes their authority in a relationship, they might create the expectation, again, that the other person owes them something or is indebted to treat them a certain way. Where I see this the most is not in direct critiques of people. I think we're pretty good at catching that in our relationships if someone's directly critical of us, but more so in indirect critiques. If you're with an individual who's constantly criticizing other people, there's a really subtle message there, and that is, if you don't do what I want you to do, I will criticize you as well. This is one of the underlying concepts that Carl Rogers, who's kind of the father of humanistic psychology, realized was that if we're always going around positively evaluating or negatively evaluating other people, then essentially what we're saying is that in order to earn my acceptance or in order to earn my love or respect, you have to act a certain way. And that teaches all of us that we're inherently unlovable. So I hope in relationships that you're with people who don't create the impression in your life that you have to act a certain way in order to gain their acceptance. If so, I'm guessing that's going to be an additional stressor in your life. Another thing you sometimes see with authority is people who tell you who you are. And that's another way of putting myself up here and you down here. It may seem pretty innocuous at the time, but be aware, if that's a constant dynamic in your relationship, that's a way of pigeonholing you, and not only pigeonholing you, but establishing the other person's opinion of you as the authority, and thus giving them power and control over what it is that you in turn do, which of course, the less control you have, the more stress you're going to experience in your life. Number 3, conformity. When someone gives you the impression that everyone's doing it, we feel pressure. That old adage, if your friends jumped off of the Brooklyn Bridge, would you do it as well? Well, of course so, right? We're social creatures. There must be something great about jumping off the bridge. That mental shortcut, though, does get us in trouble sometimes. And so I would encourage you, if someone's giving you the impression that you're going to miss out if you don't do what everyone else is doing, or that there's something wrong with you because you're not doing what everyone else is doing, this is not social support. This is someone who's using you for their own personal ends. And I think this gets particularly tricky in COVID times as we're trying to make good decisions about where to be and who to be with. I hope that you're in relationships that are looking out for your own autonomy and independence in your decision making, and that you can be respectful of others in turn as well. Then lastly, I wanted to talk about what Cialdini calls commitment and consistency. This one's really hard to pick up on sometimes. What he noticed in his research was that if you can get someone to agree to some small thing that maybe they didn't really want to do, but it's not that big of an inconvenience, and then you continue to ask for bigger and bigger favors over time, people's desire to not be viewed as hypocrites, as inconsistent people, will get them to agree to do things bigger and bigger and bigger that they really never wanted to do. This applies to all of us. Sometimes I call this compliance testing. Can I get you to do something a little bit more for me? Can I get you to do something even bigger? Will you go along with an even more bizarre or ridiculous request? If you find people in your life who use this tactic, understand that it's fundamentally coercive. Again, respecting the autonomy and rights of other individuals creates a feeling of trust, of acceptance that can grow into a much deeper relationship rather than trying to trick people into greater and greater enmeshment, trick people into feeling that they're in debt, trick people into feeling that you have authority over them and power to tell them who they are, or to trick people into going along with the crowd. And so, what's the answer to all of these? Well, the answer I would say, and by the way, the reason I'm interested in this is I think it's incredibly hard to do. All of these things, to catch them, to name them, although naming them does give you a lot of power, but it's tricky. It's tricky, and it's the more stress you're under, the less likely you are to catch it in the moment, but the more important it is to catch it. So here's what I would suggest. If you have a feeling in a social relationship that perhaps something is wrong, try to create a pause. If you can allow your own reaction to come down rather than feeling the tension of the pull to do what the person wants you to do versus what you feel is really right for you, if you can take a pause, you're more likely to make a better decision. I would encourage you too to look for relationships with people where people are not speaking in commands with you, but rather asking for favors, giving you the option to make your own choices, and that you in turn do the same for them. And then lastly, I would suggest looking for someone who's able to laugh at themselves, which we know laughter is great medicine for stress, and who's interested, like you are, in the quality of relationships rather than gathering people for social status. They're easier said than done, I know, but I'm hopeful that discussing these things right now might be a protective factor for you as you're navigating the various stressors that are naturally in the environment that we find ourselves in today. If maybe you have a little more control over the way your relationships of all varieties play out, and that you can look for those quality relationships that feed you rather than adding to the burden that you may already feel. If you can do that, a little bit more you can do to lower your stress. Of course, that improves your immune system, and to make the right decisions for you and the people in your life. I hope that was helpful. I'm glad I got to be here with you virtually, and I hope you're having a wonderful Camp Widow. I'd be happy to be in touch with any of you if you have further questions. Stay safe, stay well, and good luck navigating this brave new world. I hope I'll have the chance to be with you again sometime soon.